Good morning, boys and girls. Today, by way of an introductory book, I have something very special and different. This is fiction of the highest caliber. It's a book that some of you may know of, and if you don't, you should know of. It's called Shikasta by Doris Lessing. It's the first in a series of 5 books of what she termed space fiction. But it's far, far more than that. Much, much more than that. It's difficult to describe these books because they are so broad-reaching and profound and touch on so many human elements individually and socially that it's very difficult to overstate how beautiful these books are. Now, this one was published in 1978, and she got in a lot of trouble for it because serious writers aren't supposed to write science fiction. Well, that's just nuts. That's just crazy. And it was for things like this. Did I mention she was a student of Idries Shah? Yeah, she was a Sufi student of Idries Shah her whole life. Well, her whole adult life. But it was for doing things like this that she gained the opprobrium of the Academy. And although she had some fans around the world, as she very, very much deserves, one of them includes Philip Glass, with whom she did an opera. People didn't understand her, and they didn't appreciate having their minds stretched. But that all ended up okay when at the age of 90-something or whatever, just before she died, they gave her the Nobel Prize in Literature, which she richly deserves. She's from Rwanda in Africa, but she spent her adult life in Britain. But a more penetrating writer, I think you'll be hard-pressed to find. Let me just read a little bit out of the intro, because as I picked it up this morning, just some of these things just struck me. By the way, there's a particular book, a second book in this series that I think deserves a special mention, and that is The Marriages Between Zones 3, 4, and 5. A beautiful treatise on the sexes and the differences and reconciliation. It's just a profound novel, as is Shikasta, which, by the way, predicts the racial hatred that we're seeing in Britain and in the U.S., and by that I mean racial hatred of white people, which is kind of silly, but there it is. She says here, quote, "Yes, I do believe that it is possible, not only for novelists, to plug into an overmind or mind. In other words, a common mind, something described by Teilhard de Chardin and named a Noosphere. And more than that, our historical heritage, which we are all born with." And then here's another little passage that I think is worth pointing out. "The sacred literatures of all races and nations have many things in common, almost as if they could be regarded as the products of a single mind. It is possible we make a mistake when we dismiss them as quaint fossils of a dead past." I'd say that's true. And then there was one other point. She gave a lecture in academia, and the student, the teacher, raised her hand and says, the teacher of the class at the college where she was speaking, "If I had you in my class, I'd never let you get away with that." And of course, not everybody finds that funny, right? And the other thing that's interesting is, although it's space fiction, it has as its starting point, like many others of the genre, the Old Testament. It is our habit to dismiss the Old Testament altogether because Jehovah, or Yahweh, does not think or behave like a social worker. That right there is worth thinking about. It is our habit to dismiss the Old Testament altogether because Jehovah does not think or behave like a social worker. H.G. Wells says that when a man cries out his little gimme, gimme, gimme to God, it's as if a leveret were to snuggle up to a lion on a dark night, or something to that effect. At any rate, I can't recommend this book highly enough for lovers of literature and people who want to expand their minds and do so in a very pleasant way. A great book by any criteria.
Can you
go ahead?
Explain the Old Testament comment for those that aren't very familiar with it?
That God does not behave like a social worker?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this notion that God is, I mean, this is really going against the current, but that God must be this kind of goody-goody, justice-seeking, nice person. And when we look out at nature, we can see that for the purpose of this discussion, nothing's further from the truth. Right? Nature can be incredibly savage, so can humans. Right. And so the idea that the wisdom of the Old Testament is restricted to God behaving like a social worker is kind of a sardonic way of pointing out the fact that all the evidence, look at the book of Job, look at Abraham, look at the lives of the prophets, David and Solomon, for example, or read the Psalms. And it's very clear that it's much more profound than a fairy tale or wishful thinking on the part of the religious. Do you see what I'm saying? And so there comes a point when adults have to grow up and they have to face the world as it is, not as if how they want it to be. Someone asked me recently, well, wait a minute, if you're doing dharma, how come you can still get sick? As if the world hands out punishment or rewards based on how good you are in a superficial way. And so this kind of infantile thinking is endemic in the West. And it's a real problem because stupid is as stupid does. And we've got a lot of that running around and we can destroy ourselves with it. One example, well, I'm not going to go into warfare and its rationales and I don't want to go down that road, but the point is that the world is not like some Cinderella story, however much we may have been brought up with those Disney ideas of what the world is supposed to be like. And so that's something that requires maturity, sobriety, and just observation. I mean, look at Jesus. Look at the life of Jesus. Look at the life of Socrates. How much were they rewarded for their goodness? Well, we actually don't know because this life is just but a fleeting phenomenon. We're just passing through here, so we don't know. But those particular bodies, those particular physical entities, were both judicially murdered, and there's many others. Just as an example. So this is not Sunday school and this is not Disney World. This is real life. And few people had a more acute eye than Doris Lessing, even before she met Shaw. But then after she met Shaw, she was a big hero of the feminist movement. She was held up as an exemplar, something she resented her whole life. Because she wasn't particularly on the side of women. She was on the side of humanity. And that includes both of us. So I really, if it hadn't been for some of my special teachers, I would have missed Doris Lessing altogether. And that would have been a real loss in my life. And so those of you who are so inclined to read a great novel, or a couple, or five of them for that matter, but the first two especially, the Shikasta series by Doris Lessing. It's rare to find great writing too, by the way. I mean, outside of Melville, in the U.S., it's difficult to find. But she's British. Okay. Anything? Any follow-up to that question?
On the topic of the noosphere, or the collective conscious, is that something that's bound, like has physical limits? Like if you go to a city and go to a different city or country, will they arguably they'll have like different collective consciousnesses based on the culture?
That's an interesting point. So you're asking, in a way, if there's a spectrum of noospheres that we could talk about, say, for example, the collective consciousness of a nation state, like the Germans, for example, or the Indians, or the British, or the French, and maybe. It depends on the level of abstraction. Sure, you could see that if you want to see that. But here she's talking about mankind and mankind across the ages. Could you lift your head up just a bit?
Yeah.
And how we're, to me it's palpably true that we are the heirs of those who came before us in more ways than we imagine. Our basic presuppositions, someone who explores these areas kind of nicely is Isaac Asimov.
Who's he again?
Oh my God.
Sci-fi, right?
Yeah. So Isaac Asimov is, I'd say he's the science fiction writer. He was writing way back in the day. He wrote Foundation. He's the guy who described the rules of robotics that we still use today.
Oh, he wrote iRobot.
Well, iRobot is a collection of short stories that they made into they didn't even make it to a movie as far as I can tell.
They made it into a movie. Well,
they just took the labeling, the branding. Like No Country for Old Men is a line from Yeats. iRobot is the title of a series by Isaac Asimov. Now, he's a very smart man and a very good thinker, but he's not writing at the level of great writers, obviously. The greatest writers, which would include Doris Lessing and, of course, Melville.
Who?
Melville. You must read Moby Dick at some point. Yeah, it's probably the greatest piece of novel in English that's been written on this side of the Atlantic. I don't think there's a close second. So Moby Dick must be read at some point and reread. I just reread it again. It just gets better. A master of literature. And philosophy, and like any great writer, they're going to go into deep questions, and Moby Dick does do that. Questions of psychology and philosophy, but no one comes close. Not even Melville holds a candle to Doris Lessing in those regards. In terms of the philosophical depth. Okay. What have you learned?
Well, I was just on a trip, and I was in China and Japan.
Ooh, lucky you.
Yeah.
We need to know more about China. We are being misled about China. The materials
Yeah.
that we get are heavily propagandized, heavily filtered, heavily manipulated for I don't understand the reason, but that's what's happening, and
Mm.
that's asking for trouble. Tell us about China.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I was there for 5 days, 5 or 6 days,
Mm-hmm.
um, and so wasn't there for that long to get like a real good feel for it, but had a lot
Understood.
of first impressions. And the what you just said about the propaganda, that was one of the immediate um, things that I thought about, because my before going, my impression and my expectation was, um, I don't really know what my expectation was exactly, but it was kind of like low. I expected things to be like chaotic and
Low
not,
expectations.
not like super modern per se. Or
I'm not calling China an enemy, but let me just quote something from the Dao De Ching. There's no greater misfortune or calamity or something like that. There's no greater calamity than underestimating your enemy,
mm,
right? And let's say in business or in manufacturing or something like that, it's our competition at
yeah.
the very least. So tell us more. What did you actually see
Um,
there?
so I I was there for work, for business, and so I went. We were in Beijing,
Mm-hmm.
um, and we were staying in like the business center, so it was catered to international people a little bit. Um, but while I was there, I got to go take the subway into different parts of the city a couple times, and um, got to see some parts that were touristy for Chinese, like
How
for
would the
other
subways say
Chinese.
compared to the Boston Tea?
It was incredible. It was like very advanced. You could take a credit card to beep in. You didn't have to go to a machine and buy, or a stall and buy a ticket or anything. You could just use your credit card, beep in, go wherever you want to go, beep out, and it charges you like 50 cents. It's clean and safe,
You didn't have to step
and
over any bodies to get on the train.
none of that. And people. I expected it to be very chaotic, but people, lined up at the entrances of each subway. They had each subway station, at least the ones I went to, had the like gates where they would open up only when the train came, so you can't fall onto the tracks.
Nice. That's a big plus.
Yeah, so it just felt very like modern and advanced, and makes our cities feel backwards.
And they are,
Yeah,
especially when it comes to trains. I mean, it's pathetic. It's sad.
yeah, yeah. Um, and the sheer amount of people in that city is
How many are
was
in there? How
something.
many in Beijing?
Good question. 20, 21, 22 million.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Um,
So, in general, do you think that things were kept well? I mean, if you're in the business district, that's going to be kept up better, obviously, because it's an interface with tourists. But in general, would you say that they're moving along?
in general, yeah. I mean, the all the cars were modern electric cars. There's so it was really quiet,
Yeah, their
even though
cars
there's
are
all these.
great. Their cars are great. I saw
Yeah.
something that kind of alarmed me. Not alarmed me, but I was surprised and not surprised. But they're putting up a new space station. I think they may have
Mm.
already done it, and they're putting an experimental center. I think on the moon, and they may have already started it. But Americans get no news of this, just like we get no news of we get no news. We get basically baby food that's been filtered for us.
Hmm.
It's not
Well, the
good.
other
It's not good to have a completely ignorant populace.
the other part is we also like I was, you know, in my life all the products we got from China were like these cheap products, and so my association with China was like they make cheap, like low quality things. Um, but that felt wrong as well because they had lots of very high quality things.
Yes, you
Which
you were too young to know, but there was a big Japanese scare in the '70s. I think it was the '70s when they started eating our lunch. I mean, made in Japan was also like cheap, low quality, disposable. Nobody would ever buy it. But then after the
mm,
war, uh, Mr. Honda and the Toyota family, they went to work and their cars basically demolished the market. There was no way the American people could compete with them in terms of quality.
mhm.
I don't know if that persisted, but the same thing is now happening with China and its quality of cars, apparently. Not always, because some of their chargers are sold at a very, very low price point,
Right,
and they would not be safe and not be desirable here. But
right,
some people don't have the luxury of the safest vehicles or whatever.
yeah. But there are a lot of Teslas there too.
Yeah, but that's just a fluke because Elon's arrangement with them. I think. Did you see any Fords or Chevrolets or?
No.
No, of course not. Just like you don't see many of them in Europe. So the question is, what gives? We know that they're building cars to compete with the Japanese and doing well.
Hmm.
So what's going on in the West?
I mean, one of the things it seems just like the bureaucracy is just dragging us down, and there's things have become so inefficient that if you want to do anything, it's incredibly
China is governed by
difficult.
engineers. Most of the people in their political I don't know what they call it, but they're engineers, so they think
Mm.
differently. Yeah, I think that's the problem. The question is going to be whether or not the U.S. is going to be able to pull the nose up, and a lot of that's going to depend on your generation.
Mm.
Seriously, now if we could get our spirits up, get our hope up, get our energy up, I say we. I mean, why not? At the moment, the same thing goes for India and certainly for Europe.
The other thing I noticed, like an impression that I had in Beijing was that it was very harmonious from the just the atmosphere of the people to the way that the city was laid out,
And Japan as well,
which
huh?
not no not not Japan.
So
Japan did
Japan
not
was
feel
not
like that at all.
harmonious.
No, which was counter to my
It
expectations.
was not harmonious. Tell me how. That's interesting.
Yeah, so in Beijing, the subway map, you look at the subway map, and I mean, let me try to find a picture. I think it'll illustrate. Um,
There was
can you
a
see
picture of the
this?
railways they were building. Oh wow, yeah.
So it's, it's like it's a grid, it's almost,
Uh huh.
and there's some, like trains going like this,
Right.
and then in
He's
a
showing a
small
grid.
circle
That's
and a
yeah.
large.
Okay.
So it's really intuitive to get anywhere. It's you just go in the direction. Um, Now let me show you the Tokyo subway system.
So by harmony, you're talking about aesthetic harmony.
That was, I mean, one example.
Oh yeah, that looks like Boston or New York. It's a
Yeah.
nightmare. Yeah.
Um, so, well, one for the something that I don't know if I've seen much is just like everybody, everybody was the same race. Everybody looked the same.
Well, that's true of Japan too. It would just take out the tourists.
Yeah. So in Japan, the number of tourists in Japan was just really, really high in the places that I was.
Yeah, they're living on that now pretty much. So I was watching a physicist I admire and respect who had just been to China. Again, he knew China pretty well. And what he described was that he would ask about he's American, he would ask about how they view the American competition.
Mm.
And he said that what they had was a quiet confidence.
Mm.
And that by trying to withhold chips from them, all we did was consolidate their energies into building their own, supply chains. And then what we're doing is kind of counterproductive. And see, there's this assumption that we need to go to war for some reason, using the Greek, is it Thucydides who wrote the Peloponnesian War? I think it was Thucydides. And you have a rising economic power, and you have a status quo, and then there's always conflict. And understood that there's enormous economic competition. But what's this about? Why do we need to go to war? I don't understand that.
Mm.
What does your generation think of that?
I think people think that the war would be over Taiwan if there was one.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean too. Why would there be a war over Taiwan?
Because they make the highly advanced chips that the GPUs use, which is what the AI uses, and
we don't want China to have them. Correct?
That seems to be it, yeah.
So there's this resource that everybody in the world wants that's concentrated in no small part because we did this on the island of Taiwan, which is less than 100 miles off of China, mainland China, that's full of Chinese, albeit not the patriots of the Communist Party way back when, but that's many years ago. What did did you talk to any Chinese about this?
About Taiwan? No.
Yeah. Well, we could spend a whole hour just discussing.
I got the impression that most individuals are pretty focused on they're not.
Yeah, they're getting the job. They're getting the job done.
Yeah. The other thing I heard that there's this. Most people, like office workers in Chinese companies, work, what do they call it, 9-9-6, 9 to 9, 6 days a week.
They're working.
Yeah.
And their quality of life is improving radically.
Yeah.
And they're as smart as anybody else. And so, at any rate, I guess what I'd like to say is, number one, don't underestimate the Chinese or Chinese brothers and sisters. And two, don't presuppose that we need to go to war over these, over anything, but in particular these chips. That's just silly. And number three, if we're going to develop monstrous powers in AI or elsewhere, we need to consider how other people are going to interpret that. Especially given our recent comportment towards the rest of the world. But enough of those problems. What about dharma?
So one thing I've had on my mind that I was discussing this with a friend actually, but it's something that's kind of been on my mind for a while, and it's basically, in the past I had this idea of consciousness, and I think this is like the prevalent view on consciousness from people who haven't thought too much about it, but that, our consciousness emerges out of the brain.
Yeah, it's an emergent property. Is that
Yeah.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, that's
Right.
fun.
But like now that I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, like it seems flipped, and that like the brain emerges out of consciousness itself, or the material world is the creation
Depending on who you listen to, yeah.
right, something like that.
But saying it's
So I guess
emergent is akin to saying I don't have any idea, but I want to sound like I do, so I'll just say it's emergent. That doesn't get you any closer to it.
What do you mean?
Just say it's emergent from the brain. Doesn't get you any closer to what it is experientially, or what it is really, or what it is ontologically. Right?
Saying consciousness is emergent from the brain?
Saying, yeah, that it's emergent.
Mm.
It's a way of avoiding the question.
How come? I don't quite follow.
So two men men A and men B are discussing consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Man A says, I don't know what consciousness is. Man B says, oh, it's emergent from neurological activity. All right. What has he learned? What has either man learned about consciousness?
Well, if it were true, it would imply that you can potentially like create it artificially or something, right?
Does it?
I think that's the implication. If it comes out of the brain, then it also.
So you're saying that the brain is akin to a computer?
It seems to be, or have.
What facet of the brain seems to be like a computer? The individual neurons firing yes and on and off, yes and no, one and zero.
Yeah, like the.
Well, you could speculate that, but it's not going to. Frankly, the way I look at it, and I've studied the brain all my life, is that frankly some kind of holographic neural net type of process, not neural net, some kind of holographic and fractal process is more likely, just speaking neurobiologically.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is I'm okay. Let's say I say strawberry fields.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now that sets off a string of associations in your mind that are correlated with neural activity.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no neuron that says strawberry fields.
Right.
And if you visualize a strawberry field, there's no combination of neurons that you put together with dots and dashes, ones and zeros, yeses and nos, ons and off, that can recreate that strawberry field. On the other hand, and this is speculation, and now we're not in Dharma, we're more in speculation about neurobiology, that a holographic principle in which you reconstruct something in a manner that's more along the lines of holographic reconstruction seems to be more likely than just the linear, dot, dot, dash, dash, dot, dot, dot. Do you see what I'm saying? And I probably shouldn't just speculate on this. I mean, all I'm saying, it's just a speculation about the neurobiology.
But, I mean, are the artificial neural nets, they kind of do that, don't they?
I don't know. Maybe. But we could sit here and argue all day, or just discuss it all day. It'd be fun, I suppose,
Right.
Whether or not the Hebbian, or the neuron, axon, neuron, dendrite, neuron, axon, dendrite, cell body, da da da. Whether that's a mechanism or if there's something more elegant at play. But that's a neurobiological scientific question.
Right.
And we shouldn't get it lost in it, and why I shouldn't have brought up by speculation.
Right.
Okay.
But the awareness, the essence of awareness.
Now that's another problem altogether.
That
completely altogether question.
Right.
Until you get to the very end, and then you're into some pretty hardcore Zen. You're into some flower ornament stuff. You're into forgive me, this is jumping way ahead, but the observer is the observed type stuff. In which case consciousness becomes not just the is both the substrate, the creative and the aware.
Does it make sense?
We're jumping too far ahead, pardon me?
Does it make sense to say that awareness is like fundamental?
Absolutely.
Right.
It's much easier to get from there to a universe than to get from a universe to a mind, to awareness.
Right. Right.
Much easier, logically.
Right.
As extraordinary as it seems.
So then,
the only reason it seems extraordinary is because we've been walking around ass backwards for millennia. Not everybody, but the majority of people. It'll be interesting to see if humanity is going to give that up. This is why I get excited about AIs and VR. Is that it's going to be more and more obvious.
How does AI and VR make it more obvious? VR makes it
look, we have a machine, and in this machine, all kinds of things are happening. Entire worlds are being created, and men are on horseback riding across the mountains in the snow. I'm thinking of Red Dead Redemption, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's spaceships flying into other spaceships or shooting each other down, Star Wars type stuff. All of that's occurring within the machine. We know that because we made the machine. But there's absolutely nothing happening there without awareness. There's no there without awareness. You see, so you can have your Xbox running full tilt, Grand Theft Auto, but there's nothing happening unless there's awareness. There may as well be nothing happening at all. There is nothing happening at all, even though it seems like something's happening. I mean, even though that's an interesting thought experiment. Run it.
Well, it reminds me of if a tree falls in a forest and doesn't make a sound. Is that it? Doesn't make a sound? Is that the question?
Depends on which version. Yeah. Does it make a sound? Absolutely not, because you can't have a sound without an ear.
Right.
You can't have Grand Theft Auto without eyes. Or you can do the whole thing, but if you can't see and hear, there's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, to me, it seems obviously fundamental. This whole universe relies on awareness. Without awareness, there's no universe. Think about it. Imagine space. This is just for fun. Imagine space without the Earth in it altogether. Let's imagine we could take the Earth out, and we're the only conscious entity, right? Let's imagine those things. Assume those two things. What do we have left? Nothing.
Right.
It's wild, huh?
There's only something if there's like in the future, you could say in the future there's the Earth somehow, and then it
But without
becomes
awareness, there's nothing.
right.
All things rely on awareness to exist, which is wild to think about. It's crazy to think about. But can you find a better explanation? Without eyes, there's no blue sky.
Mm-hmm.
Without eyes, there's no moon.
And so then my next question is there awareness without humans,
Oh, yeah.
right? There's
I
well,
think. I mean, it sure looks that way.
is there awareness without biological life?
Mm, I don't think so. What do you think?
I don't know.
In principle, do you think it's possible?
I mean, in principle, I would think that biological life in is like all these different molecules interacting in a structured way, and
So you're going
could
back
there
to
be
the physical atomist quandary. Do they
well
exist
what
in a
we
physical way?
what's that?
What exists in a physical way?
What we what we categorize as alive,
Okay,
we categorize
or as
for
things.
certain or, right. But who's to say that like the desert isn't alive in some way that we can't recognize? Or the ocean?
I mean, to say absolutely not about anything is probably not wise. But at the moment, I can't imagine without some kind of. So, what you need it to persist. You want it to want to exist. As Borges would put it, a tiger desires to stay a tiger. A rock desires to stay. Now we're getting into some really esoteric stuff here, dude. Okay, so in order to maintain a boundary, which is what existence is. Okay, let's jump out of Dharma and just go to contemporary biology, computational biology. As not that I'm an expert, but in order to exist, you must maintain a boundary.
Right, and so there's things like crystals would maintain a boundary.
Right, but then you also have to be affected by the external environment, and you have to impact the external environment.
I mean, a crystal is definitely impacted by the external environment. It's shaped by heat and pressure.
And a crystal also
And
shapes the environment around it. I'm not sure I would call that life.
it also replicates itself, right?
It's true.
And
You know,
granted that
it is a problem. I know. I apologize to the audience because we're getting into some really squirrely stuff. Uh, there's thoughts that storm systems over Jupiter could potentially be akin to life in as much as they form, they want to maintain their form, they interact with their environment, the environment interacts with them, it maintains a boundary, and it keeps on going. And so in theoretical computational biology, these are issues.
right.
I
And
suspect, though, that existing and awareness Oh boy! See, if we're gonna do that, I mean, to do this, you have to jump right into the deep end,
Mm-hmm.
and basically, it's the mind only school, which is that consciousness is all there is.
Mm.
But see, when we jump out of that deep end and we get onto the side of the pool, we start talking about different objects and different consciousnesses and differentiations and all these other things that make sense from this side of the river, but not on the other side. Do you see what I'm saying? Where so for example, imagine we were having the same discussion in a dream. You fell asleep, and now you're dreaming. Now we're having this discussion. So in this discussion in your dream, is this a stick or is it consciousness? Well, it's kind of both.
Mm-hmm.
And you can hear it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean it's not consciousness. But that's different than having its individual identity, right? But then identity goes away because consciousness is all there is, and all you are is consciousness. And so identity is the false construct. You see, and so we build, if you look at the assumptions of what you were saying, you find that you're assuming the identity of the crystal.
Mm-hmm.
Or
the boundary.
the storm, Jupiter. Yeah. But then, see, that's on this side of the river. Once we get to the other side of the river, those distinctions don't mean anything. So for the folks that are interested, and I apologize if this is too weird and esoteric, but Michael Levin, Levin, Chris Fields, Fields, and Karl Friston, Friston. And then underneath each one of these, there's thousands of references and talks and theoretical discussions and things like that. So, and it is a lot of fun. I mean, we are on this world for a while, right? So a little while, why not enjoy it? And that's one of the ways to enjoy it, is trying to figure out how the thing works, even though how it works is just temporary and provisional. I mean, we used to believe that there was some net that was holding up the stars. Or there was a shell around the world, and there were little holes through which the starlight, the holes were light that the things, that the stars shone through. And we're equally primitive now. We just, it's just not easily accessible to us. Okay, any other dharma?
Nothing as hardcore as that one, I guess.
Yeah, that is pretty tough. But the flower ornament helps with it, because this has worked out. So where are you with the flower? Can we read a little of that?
Yeah.
Good.
I have it open at page 105.
It's like a box of chocolate. You never know what you're going to get. It's an acquired taste, admittedly, folks. So it takes some patience and some energy and some effort to get into these worlds, but believe me, they're worth it. Yeah, why don't you start with the wind spirit, unimpeded light. Unimpeded light. So this is the wonderful adornments of the leaders of the world, and they're talking about the different ways there are to find the door of liberation, which is the same thing as the gateless gate that the Zen guys talk about, or what Jesus means by knock, and it will be open to you. So why don't you start there?
Okay. Furthermore, the wind spirit unimpeded light found the door of liberation, entering into all the Buddha teachings in all worlds. The wind spirit, everywhere manifesting courageous action, found the door of liberation, providing extensive offerings to all the Buddhas appearing in innumerable lands. The wind spirit, wind-striking cloud banner, found the door of liberation, illuminating the sickness of all sentient beings with a fragrant wind. A fragrant wind. The wind spirit, arrays of pure light, found the door of liberation, producing roots of goodness in all sentient beings and causing them to pulverize the mountains of multiple barriers. The wind spirit, power to dry up water, found the door of liberation, able to defeat boundless armies of malicious demons. The wind spirit, great voice howling everywhere, found the door of liberation, annihilating the fears of all sentient beings. The wind spirit, tree branch hanging top knot, found the door of liberation of the ocean of powers of elucidation, entering into the real character of all things. The wind spirit, going everywhere unimpeded, found the door of liberation of the treasury of techniques to harmonize and civilize all sentient beings. The wind spirit, various mansions, found the door of liberation, entering into still, serene, meditative poise, and destroying the extremely deep darkness of folly and ignorance. The wind spirit, great light shining everywhere, found the door of liberation of unhindered power to go along with all sentient beings. At that time, the wind spirit, unimpeded light, imbued with the power of the Buddha, looked over all the wind spirits and said in verse, "The teachings of all Buddhas are most profound, with unhindered means by which all may enter, appearing always in all worlds, signless, formless, without image. Observe how the Buddha in the past gave offerings to endless Buddhas in a single instant. Such bold enlightenment practice, everywhere manifesting, can comprehend. Buddha saves the world inconceivably. None of his methods are used in vain. All cause action to be free from distress. This is the liberation of Cloud Banner. Beings have no blessings. They suffer many pains, with heavy veils and dense barriers always deluding them. Buddha makes them all attain liberation. This is known to pure light. The Buddha's vast mystic power conquers all armies of demons. All his methods of subduing, healthy power is able to observe. Buddha emanates subtle sounds from his pores, which extends everywhere throughout the world, causing all misery and fear to end. This is understood by howling everywhere. Buddha in all oceans of lands always preaches over unthinkable eons. This wonderful elucidation power of Buddhahood, tree branch top knot, can comprehend. Buddha's knowledge enters all avenues of means, completely free of hindrance therein. His realm is boundless and without any equal. This is the liberation of going everywhere. The Buddha's state is without bounds. By expedient means he shows it everywhere. Yet his body is tranquil and has no form. This is the liberation, door of various mansions. The Buddha cultivated practices for oceans of eons, and has completely fulfilled all powers, and can respond to beings in accord with worldly norms. This is the view of shining everywhere.
Very nice. Yeah, it's a mind stretcher, a mind expander. Any questions or thoughts about that? These enlightening beings have killer names.
Yeah.
Okay, any other thoughts or questions before we...
You had a tweet, better to make a good future than to predict a bad one.
Better to make a good
future than to predict a bad one.
Yeah. So this is because quite a few people are in despair.
Mm-hmm.
And despair is not going to get us anywhere as humanity. And so it's very chic among intellectuals to talk about all the problems in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And how we're all going to hell, and all civilizations end, like Roman civilization and British and so on and so forth. All of this is very fashionable.
Mm-hmm.
So there needs to be some voices that say, and there are a few now that are standing up, which is really wonderful to see, that say, hey, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be like this. Mm-hmm. Instead of predicting a bad future, why don't we just make a better one? And it's kind of like in that spirit that I question why we have to assume a war with China. That doesn't make any sense, especially not for us, because their manufacturing is way beyond anything we're capable of right now, and likely to be capable of. And if we don't have some kind of communications about AI and some kind of consensus about what's going to be okay and not okay, then you could expect people to get very paranoid, right? Even without us bombing them, right? Which is, I don't know where we get this bad habit, but we seem to have the bad habit of bombing people. And those days should be over, frankly. That's so 20th century and before. We should just say, that's just silliness. We can use economic and diplomatic and other kinds of tools to preserve the peace. Because you don't want to inflame paranoid people. That's rule one in psychiatry. And if they're bigger than you are, if their economy is 1.5 to 2 sizes the size of your economy, maybe you ought to try a little understanding before you just go off and flame the fire of enmity between these two.
So what can, for that sort of thing, what can someone like me do? Like, I'm not a politician or anything.
You can learn about China. You could learn about what's really going on there instead of this garbage that The Economist and the Wall Street Journal shovel down people's throat. And the New York Times. I mean, they just lie. It's just awful. There's a price that gets paid for that. And one of them is you misgauge things. Like we started another war, we lost another war, right? Well, if our policy is to just start unwinnable wars, we should be explicit about that. And if it's to prolong unwinnable wars because we think it's in our economic interest or something like that, we should be explicit about that too. Because I don't think most sane people go along with that. So, at any rate, well, welcome back from your Asiatic journeys.
Thank you.
And yeah, what you can do is learn more.
Okay.
It's got incredibly rich history, and things to teach the world, and this jingoism that we have in the United States, and may probably less in Britain, but certainly in the United States, it's got to go. Sayonara.
Okay.
Take good care. Ciao.
Yeah.